Well, I could say, it's August the 8th, 2003, and I'm now 91 years old and attempting to retire. Is that okay? Things like that?
That's great.
I'm Adolph Gasser. I'm 91 years old, and I'm being interviewed by John Aliano about some of the experiences in my life.
I worked for him for years. He knew me. I was doing workshops. But even after I asked him to do this feature documentary, he was hesitant. He was really hesitant. I think part of it was because he's a humble guy. He doesn't want to put himself way out there. He's one-on-one great, and he'll talk to anybody. I just kept sort of nudging, and I would see him and ask. And finally, I think he realized that he wasn't going to get rid of me. And he was either going to say, stop it, or, okay, let's do this. And that he did have a story to tell, many stories to tell. What do you see yourself doing on your 100th birthday?
Well, that's pretty hard to answer because I don't know whether I'll be here or not. I was born on January the 7th, 1912.
Did you enjoy your childhood?
No, not too well. My father and mother were divorced. Near as I can figure, somewhere between 6 and 7 years old. It was a case of growing up not having some of the freedoms that other youngsters had because their parents were better financially off than we were. I never went hungry, but it was always a question of trying to earn a little bit of money here or there. During high school, I delivered a couple of hundred chronicles every morning. I got up at 2:30 in the morning and delivered those before I went to school. It wasn't exactly an easy childhood. I had a lot of responsibilities thrown on me that other youngsters didn't have. I married, was 24 years old, and told my boss that I had decided to go in the camera repair business myself. And so my wife and I had saved $750, and I used that to go in business. I was a camera technician when the war broke out. I had my own shop, and I was doing a lot of military repairs and people that were going through San Francisco to the Pacific War Theater. And one day, a naval officer asked me if I was interested in joining the Navy, and he asked me about my education, and unfortunately, due to the Depression years and economic conditions, I was unable to get a college education. And he stated, well, we're sorry, but we can't give you a commission without college education. I began to think, well, I really want to serve my country. There was a photographer who I knew prior to the war, and he was with the Air Transport Command. He said to me, boy, we could sure use people like you in the Air Transport Command with your background and knowledge. And so I took him up on it, and he talked to his captain, and they said, oh yes, we'd like to have Gasser. I applied, and I took a voluntary induction. I was 31 years old. After a basic training, when I came to the young man who was making the decisions, he said, well, we're going to make you a B-17 tail gunner. And I looked at him and I said, I think that would be a terrible waste of talent. He said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, in civilian life, I'm a professional camera technician. So they looked it up, and I got the proper classification. It was there that I reported to Lieutenant Jerome Ossip as a photo officer. He told me that when he got through officers training school, they said, well, you're a photo officer. And he said, I don't know the first thing about photography. And I said, well, fortunately, that's my business, and I do know it. I was on the island of Tinian. My basic job was to keep the cameras in good working condition. I was there the evening the Enola Gay was prepared to take off with the atomic bomb, the first atomic bomb in history to be dropped on Hiroshima. The last few minutes before takeoff, Captain Jerome Ossip, who was responsible for me getting into the 509, came to me and said, Adolph, why don't you get a K-20 hand-operated camera and load it up, give it to the tail gunner, see whether or not he can get any pictures. And so I loaded the camera and went to Bob. He said, oh, I don't know the first thing about photography. I said, well, it's pretty simple. I've set all the proper controls, and all you have to do is crank this lever and pull the trigger. So he was in a perfect position to shoot the pictures. And those were the pictures that we got back from the Enola Gay.
I'm talking with Bob Karen, who was the tail gunner on the Enola Gay the day it flew to Hiroshima, Japan, and dropped the first atomic bomb. Bob, what do you remember about that day? It's been 40 years.
There's a number of things I remember about the mission. The briefing we had about 2 days before, when Colonel Tibbets called all the crews that would be involved in the mission to a briefing, told us that we would be carrying a new type of weapon. He said it would be the equivalent of 20,000 tons of TNT. It was 2 days later when we finally got to go ahead on the weather, and we were told we were going to fly that night. We took off on all our missions at 2:45 in the morning to get up to Japan in the early morning daylight. It looked like a Hollywood movie set, with lights set up and cameramen and brass hats floating around, generals, admirals. We were trying to prepare for a mission. I remember getting stopped from that work to come out and pose for pictures. Tibbets came back to the waist section to talk to us. Bob, have you figured out what we're doing this morning? And I said, hell no, Colonel. We chatted for a few minutes, and he started forward through the tunnel, and just his foot was sticking out, and I reached up and I yanked on his foot, which you usually don't do to colonels. I says, Colonel, are we splitting atoms this morning? And he gave me the funniest look, and he shook his head and said, yes. And shortly after he got on the intercom and announced that we were carrying the first atomic bomb. At bombs away, Tibbets threw the plane in a diving right-hand turn for about 160 degrees and then straightened out. Called back to me and told me, Bob, let me know what you see when you see something. It probably was a minute or maybe less when the flash went off. And through the welder's goggles, the explosion was just a tremendous buildup of light, enough to make me blink real hard. And Tibbs called on the intercom again, do you see anything yet? Said, nothing yet, Colonel, and just about that time, the mushroom started coming in view. I had been given a K-20, a large camera.
Takes 5x5 inch film and a roll of about 50 exposures on the roll. And as you crank the handle, as I'm doing, then all you have to do is aim the camera, release the shutter. You recock it, it advances the film, and cocks the shutter for the next exposure. It's a relatively simple piece of equipment, and I personally set the exposure, everything, so that tail gunner, all he had to do was pick the camera up and aim it at the atomic blast and pull the trigger and recock the shutter.
I was told to take pictures and then describe what I saw on the intercom. So I was kind of busy doing that and didn't think too much about it. It was an awesome sight. I described the mushroom cloud as it grows as being, it was white on the outside and it was sort of a purplish black towards the interior, and it had a fiery red core. and it just kept boiling up. And I was trying to get pictures through the windows of the tail turret. The back windows were kind of small, and I do remember calling the colonel up on the intercom that if he would turn the airplane a few degrees to the left so I could get better pictures out the escape hatch window. And he did. So that's how I took most of my pictures. As we got further away, I could see the city then, not just the mushroom coming up. It was being covered with this low, bubbling mass. It looked like bubbling molasses, let's say, spreading out and running up into the foothills, just covering the whole city. Fires, I could see fires springing up through this undercast, or whatever you would call it, that was covering the city. Flames in different spots would be springing up.
This was one of the best kept secrets of World War II. Even people in our unit were not briefed. Even our higher echelon of officers were briefed only a day or so before the bomb was dropped. My captain came to me and said, "We've been briefed," and he said, "It's unbelievable." That's all he would tell me. He said, "I can't talk about it," etc. I was in a peculiar position that I had figured it out due to the fact that I had met a scientist, and he told me about the New Mexico test blast that consumed a 100-foot steel tower completely, and it was the first atomic explosion. But it rang a bell with me.
Do you have any regrets about being part of the team that dropped the first atomic bomb?
No. Many people have criticized the United States for doing this, but I should say that to the best of our knowledge, we were informed that the United States expected casualty figures on both sides, Japanese and American, to run close to 1 million casualties. So we made sacrifices. We brought the war to a close, and many enlisted personnel and others, friends, came to me when they'd meet us and say, "I'm here because of what you did. My life has been extended." But after the war stopped, the rest of the services were not prepared to get all the troops back. We had just had to wait. So eventually, we just said, well, I guess they've kind of forgotten us at home, just going to leave us out here forever. But finally, we were assigned to a troop transport, SS Duels, designed to be fully equipped with about 1,800 personnel. We, in addition to the crew, we had about 2,500 people. We came back on that. I slept on the deck. The sleeping quarters had canvas things just about every 12 or 14 inches that you could just barely slip into. And people got sick down there. That was very, very hot. There wasn't a complaint on the ship, not a single one. Everybody said, "We're going home." So when we got under the Golden Gate Bridge, I thought, oh my God, this is just one of the big experiences of my life, because there was a big sign on the Marin Hills, "Welcome home." Fireboats were there spraying water, and it's just a tremendous experience.
Well, he took the picture of the mushroom cloud over Hiroshima that is, it really is the signature image of the dawn of the atomic age. When you see that, you know that it's an atomic bomb that blew that Hiroshima out of existence, and this is the aftermath of it. So it's become a photographic symbol of the war and of the atomic age, and also the enormous destructiveness of atomic bombs. If you buy a Nikon camera today, it's made by Nikon Incorporated. At one point, they had 22 different locations. They were expanding at an enormous rate, producing just thousands and thousands of stuff. Binoculars, gun sights, periscopes, rangefinders, anything that would be needed. There was a very, very hungry market worldwide for optical goods of the right kind. The GIs, the occupation forces, soldiers weren't well paid, but they are a heck of a lot better paid than the Japanese citizenry. And the occupation actually encouraged them to buy optical goods other than going out and drinking or hiring prostitutes or something like that. It was much better if they bought cameras. There was a wheeler dealer named Uno Lindholm, who was one of these opportunist entrepreneurs who would find goods, buy them up, and then resell them and make a profit. He was constantly, doing different things. He had gone to Japan in 1948 and seen a sample. Well, he knew a guy named Sakai, who had been friends. Sakai had been in Sweden during the war, finding military goods to send to Japan for their war effort. They looked him up, and he saw a picture of the camera, and Lindholm said, this is going to be the perfect thing to market in the United States. Went to San Francisco, looked up Hans Lindholm, whose father knew Lindholm, started a company, incorporated a company called Overseas Finance and Trading Company, OFITRA. Lindholm was in charge of it, and their primary objective as a company was to import NK products into the United States. They sent him cameras. He sent him a couple of shipments of the cameras, and Lindholm, who really didn't know much about photography, but he was game to learn, he took them around to local dealers in San Francisco, and they said, get this Japanese junk out of here. We don't want to see any of that stuff. Gasser had a reputation as being the premier camera repairman in San Francisco. All the professionals used him. He had a very close professional friendship with Ansel Adams, the famous photographer. They were best buddies. He repaired all of Adams' equipment and all the other professionals in the area. So when Lindholm said, what am I going to do about selling them? They said, well, go talk to Gasser. He'll tell you what needs to be done. He met him, said, what do you think of this camera? And Gasser had already seen one of them earlier, but he took the camera and he tore it apart. Being a camera repairman, that was easy enough to do. And when Lindholm came back in, he said, this is actually a pretty good camera. I like certain things, but it's got problems. And you'll never be able to sell it in the United States because of the 24x32 format. That's got to be changed. You need to be able to advance the film 8 sprockets to match the codec processing machines instead of 7 sprockets. Because if you're running 7 sprockets when you record and then 8 sprockets when you try to process it, you're going to slice down the middle of negatives. Gasser went one step further, as he said, if you do this and this and this, you can expand the format to 24x34 and advance 8 sprockets, and that's close enough, you'll be able to sell the camera. So he had the solution. He not only told him what the problem was, he also had the solution. He also told him that the pressure plate was too flimsy, tripod socket is too flimsy, it's just pressed metal, it'll tear right out. He had a couple other suggestions too. And they stopped manufacturing the camera, went back, retooled, and 3 months later, they started producing the cameras again. Gasser had used, when he was in the Air Force during the Second World War, they had used a lubricant that was very good at high altitudes. They had to have a lubricant that would work in sub-freezing temperatures. And they sent samples of that to NK, and NK then used that instead of the heavy lubricants they had been used, which paid dividends during the Korean War. Korea was a cold place. That winter was unusually, I think, very severe. The troops were in sub-zero temperatures and stuff like that, and the photographers were out there as well. And the Leicas and the Contaxes and stuff like that stopped working. They couldn't function, while the Nikons kept functioning. And a lot of them took the Nikon as a backup when they went over. Oh yeah, we'll take this Japanese camera with a backup. Well, 3 or 4 months into the war, that's all they were using because the other cameras had stopped working. But what you do see as you look at the different versions, shall we say, of the same camera, a constant improvement in quality, better detailing, better construction, cleaner construction, things aren't as rough, things are better finished. High-quality cameras are sold through retail stores, through dealers who expected to have the merchandise available. Gasser pointed out in the photographic industry, if a person walked into a store interested in a camera, if you didn't have it in stock, you didn't make the sale. Even if you promised you'd have a camera to show them in 2 weeks, they would go somewhere else. And Lee Holm accepted that. He accepted that Gasser knew what he was talking about, and Gasser was prepared to go to dealers, go to camera repair shops, set up a network of repair stations. That style was very effective. Once the camera started selling in 1951, they're going straight to Gasser's shop, and Gasser was checking every camera out, making sure they were all working and stuff like that, and then he was shipping them out to the dealers across the country. He was the one making sure that the shutter speeds were right and the lenses fit, everything like that. I mean, he was the professional camera repairman, which in turn was the quality control expert to make sure that when the cameras went out, they were perfect. Every issue of Modern Popular Photography, they all had an ad for the Nikon camera as used by photojournalists in Korea, and as reported, they took advantage of that. So Gasser went over there in August of 1951. He took his optical instruments that he used for calibrating shutters and calibrating lenses with him. He sent plans to them as to how to make these things, and they proceeded to show them that the instruments they had been using weren't very good. But he went over there and he spent most of the time in the factory, and the pictures that he took show enormous record of what was going on at the time. And the management, of course, treated him very well, wined and dined him, so to speak. But there are several things that are happening. For one thing, NK was concerned about whether the sales were taking off the way they should. And so they were working with Sakai to work out a deal with Sears Roebuck to sell cameras through Sears and Roebuck. And Gasser basically blew a gasket and said, no, you will not do that. You are a professional camera. Professional cameras are purchased by photographers from retail stores. If you go to the route with Sears and Roebuck, it'll ruin your reputation and you'll never be seen as a professional camera. And he sat down and wrote the letter that Sakai delivered to Sears and Roebuck, turning down the contract. The previous year, he had sent a design for adding flash sync, which they incorporated in November, December 1950. And he said he took a patent on it, but never made any money on it.
What he did was he established the quality of the Japanese equipment that was very high quality. I mean, right after the war, they were so poor, they were making toys out of tin cans. I remember that. It was cheap Japan stuff was what we thought. And that wasn't, my dad saw that was not the case. He really elevated how we looked at them in terms of the quality of their products. Well, my full name is Dorothy Cox, but it started out being Dorothy Jean Gasser. Kind of an awkward name for a little girl going to school. I was born in 1939, and my brother, John, is 2.5 years younger than me. By that time, he already had his business going, and he already had terrific skills in terms of fixing cameras. But it's a picture of Dad with 3 employees and my mother, and that's why I love the picture so much, because she was really a support to his earliest start. In the very beginning, she was a tremendous help. And then when he went into the Air Force, she kept the business going, which if she hadn't been doing it all along, helping him, she wouldn't have been able to keep it going. But he was gone at least 3 years. I really miss my dad, but on the other hand, we still had a pretty good life while he was gone, and he would try and send us, if he could, pictures or whatever he was doing. The Woodacre is a beautiful place. Dad loved the trees, the oak trees here. Built the house underneath the trees and said, stay cool. He laid the foundation in 1949, and we would come here summers. The reason why they wanted a summer home was because it was so foggy in the summer in San Francisco that we were getting sick every single summer. Us kids, John and I. They wanted a nice summer home, and that was supposed to be this, but Dad got the idea that we would live here. It ended up not really working for Mom after a couple of years. So we came here in the beginning, camped out, stayed somewhere else while they worked on the house and the property. And he and Mom were very close in the beginning. She finally said, John needs some special tutoring. She said, he needs some special tutoring, he's not getting it here. She called up the people that were renting our house on 30th Avenue and told them that they had a month to leave and didn't tell my dad. That, you know, so if that tells you anything, and I'm sorry, but that's, you know, we moved back to the city. She felt, she was a city girl. She felt pretty isolated here. I had a lot of security that a lot of children don't have, because my father was, when he was not in the war, he was always there. I knew that he was very competent. He could fix anything, do anything. I'm used to those kind of men, you know, and that get me in trouble. I was so young, it was pathetic. You know, I was 20 when I got married, and I just come back from Europe, and my boyfriend met me in Walden Pond, and we talked about farming, and next thing I knew, I was getting married. I mean, he was like, wait a minute. And we hadn't been that close to each other, and I'd been away for 9 months, you know, and all of a sudden I'm telling him, we were going across the bridge. I was telling him that I'm gonna get married. And he almost had an accident. He was so shocked. I mean, I looked so young. I did not look like somebody that was ready to get married, you know, and that's definitely with Dad. You're not mature enough to do that. You know, he was not happy, but he was gracious, but he wasn't happy. Going to college, he was kind of sorry he sent me to college. And I remember I took anthropology classes and said something about, you know, kind of accusing him of being one of the greedy businessmen that were only paying Bolivian tin workers 10 cents an hour, you know, the kind of thing. Oh boy, he got mad at that one. Really got mad. So we were never walking exactly the same path. Look at the house. I mean, this is what he left me.
Is it okay if I ask you some questions?
Well, certainly. Very proud to have you pick me as to be interviewed.
How do you feel about your name?
How do I feel about my name? I feel very good about my name because it's a German-Swiss name, and it was named after my father, who was also Adolph Gasser. I'm proud of my heritage.
I thought, I'm not sure I deserve it. You know, I was kind of a black sheep in a way, but no, he loved his family, he took care of his family. He wasn't home a lot, and he'd get home really late. And that was kind of an uncomfortable time. I remember my mom keeping the food hot for him because he rarely was at the table anymore. So I didn't know a lot about what was happening with my mom and dad at that time. But I think they were beginning to go their own ways. Mom got really sick, and very sick in her early 40s. And I think Dad didn't know how to deal with that.
He shared a lot with Martha and I about his regrets, and I believe that he loved Grammy very much and was really devastated by the divorce. That was something that he talked about at the end of his life quite a bit.
I want to say he was a wonderful grandfather to my children. When Sarah was born, he was there and taking pictures and very proud to be a grandpa and, you know, very family-oriented. He was like the family tree, and he was like a very tall, stalwart redwood tree or something. That's kind of how I saw him. And he always cared about family members. You know, and the family kept getting bigger. You know how the trees got kind of small branches at the top and then they get wider and wider? Well, that's kind of how I saw my dad. It was hard for him to let me go, to just let me do my thing. So I was the one with children, grandchildren, and he was very good to my family. He always looked after all of us. Mom died at 75. I'm sorry to say. She had had some kind of cancer and had recovered from it, and it came back when she had to have heart surgery. But all of a sudden she went from being able to walk to being in a wheelchair. So when they said heart surgery, she went for it. It changed her. It changed her, who she was. She couldn't remember who anybody was. It broke my heart. And then it turned out that the surgery, they had reopened the cancer. And so she didn't live a long time after the heart surgery. And it was a big loss for me, because I really loved her so much. She loved life. She went to the very end as a very brave woman. And she died very suddenly, unexpectedly. She committed suicide. She basically, the doctor said, I can't do anything. It's all through your body. And she said, okay, that's it, I'm done. My mom's name is Rose. And all of a sudden there was this beautiful fragrance of roses in the room as this woman and I are talking and praying together. I have a witness. The whole room just lit up. There was a fragrance of roses, the whole room lit up, and we said, she's fine. She's good. I had so much peace, I can't tell you.
Basically, when you work for Adolph, your family, whether it's a stock boy or a general manager, he pretty much treated everyone the same. And he took me in, and he mentored me, and he taught me how to fix things, and he taught me about life. He was basically my father. If you met him today, you'd probably think, oh, he's a conservative asshole. But basically, he really loved people, and he treated people really well.
And so when I got married to somebody that Adolph knew, and Adolph talked to that person, the person who was marrying me said she thinks she wears the pants in this family, but you know, once we get married, things will change. And then Adolph was like really upset about that. And he told me it would never work. But he was totally right. He was the only person that said don't marry him, it will never work. And he was 100% right. And that was what happened. Adolph told me that, and I didn't believe him. I said, he would never say that. That I think I wear the pants in his family. And then it ended up being true.
If an employee got pregnant or bought a house, he'd give them a raise. If they were in trouble, he would help them. He's taking employees in.
We announced that we were going to get married, and Adolph just jumped out of his shoes. Oh, we'll have the wedding here. I'll go get, there's a woman named Connie. I'll get Connie on this. This is going to be great. We told him Monday. We had the wedding on Thursday, and in that time, they organized everything. They had, music. They had food. They had somebody to marry us, who conveniently worked around the corner at a place called Mr. Ralph's, where everybody spent their coffee breaks. And shortly after, my son was born, and Adolph liked to say that he was practically conceived in the store. Thanks, Adolph.
Wanted to be everything to everybody. There were employees who weren't performing well. He hated to fire people. He just would work with them, or he just really took care of people.
This will be my 18th year. I've been hired, fired, quit, rehired. I was fired because I called the rep a slime bag, of which he readily admits he was. And about 3 months after that, they hired me back. And I've been doing rentals since then. I'm really good at my job. I can smell a rat. I know the equipment pretty much. I don't know everything, and if I said I knew everything, I would be lying, and I'm a horrible liar, so that doesn't work. But I've been doing rentals. I also do studio, and it's a scary position when people come in now and they ask to speak to me, because apparently I'm the only person who knows some things. So now I am literally the old man of the place.
Could you tell us about Adolph's ability to fix things?
Oh, God. It's legendary. He would fix everything. I mean, things that even his son would just buy new ones. Man, he would just take them apart and for the first time. And the two of us would take it apart and he'd figure out what was wrong. Adolph would drive with fuel rails in the back of his car and computers for the cars. He'd break down on the road, he'd get out, take the fuel rail off, put another one in, drive off. And when he was 90, he was still changing his own oil. You could get an oil changer for $20. They do it for you. He still did it himself. Adolph employed all the skills employees had. So I fixed photo stuff in cars, but I built furniture. And if we needed something done with wood, he'd call me. If we needed something done with something else, if one of our employees had that skill, they get called. It's all hands on deck. You have the whole spectrum from people who hated their work to people who liked it to people who loved it. When I worked in the store, it was interesting. But when I got this job at Clement Street, I'd be coming in at 6 in the morning. Sometimes I'd stay till midnight. I came in on weekends. I couldn't get enough. I absolutely found my passion. And they encouraged it. John would show up at 8 o'clock at night. I'd be there working. He didn't say, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "What you doing?" And he'd help. Most of them loved him. Some of them who didn't know him hated him. They thought he was some old rich white guy who didn't care about anything and didn't pay him enough. And he always paid more than minimum wage. He had profit sharing. He had health care. If you got into trouble, he would help you. Privately, secretly, he would help. He had a couple of advantages. So, being the world's foremost repairman at the time, the fact that he had full darkroom service, motion picture, camera sales, film, developing, it was a one-stop shop. So we had a shooting studio on the first floor where rentals were. And that's where I met Imogen Cunningham. I walk in there and there's this 5-foot-tall woman smoking a cigar and holding a machine gun. And a Bentley was in there. And it was for a photo shoot for her.
Imogen was a very fiery person, and she was about 4'11", I think. So Imogen comes to my father and said, "Well, I got to get paid now." Father says, "What are you talking about?" And Imogen says, "Well, I think a twin lens Foley would be right." And Father goes, "Oh." And then she tells him, "Well, Everett had invited me and everything else." So Father said, "Okay, there."
I was at ILM when they were making Star Wars to fix their darkroom stuff. And I had no interest in science fiction and they would show me these mock-ups. Like, you know the scene where there's a war scene and they're all marching and there are huge things and small, well, those huge things are this tall. And they had this huge layout table and it was like war games. And they placed everything and they would photograph it frame by frame. And they were so interested and excited and they wanted to show me. And it's like, I didn't fucking care. So I did my work. And when it came out, I never saw the movie. And then at one point, John came to me and said, "Hey, did you see Star Wars?" I said, "No." "Is it good?" He said, "Well, I've seen it 21 times and I'm going again. Do you want to come?" 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we went off and saw Star Wars. And I'm saying, "Hey, John, those things are this tall." And I'm starting to tell him this stuff. And it's like, "How do you know that?" I was like, "Well, I was up at ILM while they were filming it." He was pissed. We made a cardboard cutout of Adolph. You saw those pictures and everyone took turns posing with it.
Because I remember that big picture, everybody took photos with that, shaking his hand. I have one of me with that too.
You know how it's like one little thing can change your life? You walk up to the corner and you're going to turn right, but no, I'm going to get a candy bar. And your life is totally different than what it would have been. Well, this has happened to me every day of that job. It's like him offering me the job. Oh, so now college is off the table, right? Major thing. My house came up for sale. He decided I had to buy it. So he helped me. He and John helped me buy it. And all through life, he was there for the good stuff, the bad stuff. When I wound up in the hospital, he and John showed up in the ICU to hang out with me. I thought I was dying because what are they doing here? You know, that's family. Integrity was job one. He would never, you know, try to rip someone off, sell them something defective, or screw them in a trade-in. Or integrity was everything to him. His word was his bond.
Ansel never took a vacation. He lived and worked for his craft, his photography, and he was very happy in doing so. My association, basically, when Ansel had a problem with equipment or all, he came to see me. I earned my living repairing cameras. While I got to know Ansel quite well, as you know, I worked in his home and built his enlarging equipment for him. And he would tell me what he needed, and it was my job to do it. Prior to that, he had asked me to outfit a complete darkroom setup, largers and lenses and everything that he needed up in Yosemite. He gave me a list of things he needed. I got everything together, went up there and set it up for him.
Well, I think Ansel looked around to try to find somebody that was knowledgeable. There weren't a lot of people who were knowledgeable about the kind of work that Ansel needed, working with the lenses and then putting the darkroom together.
Adolph did all of Ansel's work. So by the 1960s, Ansel Adams had moved to a home in Carmel, California, and he asked Adolph to build his darkroom.
During that time, I put 5 days in at the shop, and then Saturday and Sunday I worked down there. So that was a 7-day week.
Ansel did some contact printing, but he really liked to do 1620s, and that meant using 8x10 negatives and projecting them. And then he did the murals in here. This was originally a portrait camera that Adolph found somewhere. And it's like an oversized, I think it's 1114.
It was basically a huge studio camera that was used for photography. It needed structural changes in it, and that was part of what I had to do. And also, he asked me if I could build him a light source. I went everywhere that I could to find out what lighting was available, and finally decided on 36 2.5-inch reflector lamps. Then later I added 36 switches, so each lamp had a switch. In addition to the 36 lamps, we had a fluorescent tube made to fit in front of them. When we tested that light source, it was absolutely even. There was no fall off in the corners. I built it large enough to cover 8x10. Ansel would stand in the back, project his image that he saw on the easel, and would start flipping switches to raise the level or lower the level of light on different portions of the negative. So if he wanted this corner and this switch here controlled the light down over here because it was reversed. Finished with that, and was satisfied with the lighting. Then he would dodge areas. He'd blank about or dodge them to hold the light back. And he would make a graph of that, a picture that laid over the negative. So when he put that away, he knew how many seconds he dodged in what area, and also all of the lamps that were turned off. He had a complete list of those which switches were turned off. And so that's one of the things that he controlled before he started exposing to make his large prints.
Yeah, and this shows pictures of, these are Ansel working with it. John Sexton had taken these. And on this side, there is one picture of Ansel in the San Francisco darkroom, taken in 1936.
In addition to his ability to sense a good picture, he also had terrific talents in the darkroom. I don't think anybody that I've ever met has equaled his talents in the darkroom of what he could do with his prints. Sometimes when he talked about certain things in photography, he actually was over my head to understand all. But I learned a great deal, just dissociation. I learned composition and that. Kept telling my customers, you're making a mistake when you shoot a picture of your friends 15 feet away. I said, the image is so damn small, you really can't see what it's all about. I said, fill your frame up. Use your whole frame. And it makes a big difference. And
even though he worked 5-6 days a week, he went down on the weekends for many weekends, built that dark room for him. And so I said to him, Adolph, what did he pay you for this? And he said, nothing. We're best friends. You don't charge somebody.
Thing is, I never sent Ansel a bill. And nothing was ever sent. I never sent him a bill. Whether that influenced him to give me that picture, I don't know.
And I said, what was the picture? He said this was moonrise over Hernandez, New Mexico, which is, if anyone knows Ansel Adams' work, one of his top still photographs ever. And it's a seminal photograph, beautiful, very large, signed, a gorgeous piece. I said, could you bring it next week? I'd love to videotape this. And he said, okay, just be careful with it. And so he brings it. And I set it up, I have my camera, I'm filming it, and I'm seeing how beautiful this thing is. It's gorgeous. The grain structure, the film, it's just one of the great images you'll ever see. And I thought for a moment about taking it and leaving, but that wouldn't have been very good for the documentary.
Ansel worked for WPA for a long time, and they hired him to just drive around and take photos. And I knew Ansel gave that to him. I didn't know it was for the darkroom stuff, because it's probably worth like $1 million now. And he was out a really long day, and he shot 8x10. So he's driving back, he's exhausted, and he looks over and he sees this scene. He just slams on the brakes. He's getting the camera out and he's getting the film loaded and he's getting everything. He didn't have enough time to meet her. So he took 3 shots. And he didn't even know what he had. He didn't develop it for quite a while because he had spent all day shooting other stuff. And he didn't mark those. So those were a surprise.
In the meantime, I'd met my wife, and I took Marion. I asked them if it would be all right if I brought Marion with me, and they said yes. And they made her most welcome, and we stayed at their home. So I wasn't out from a motel having run back and forth. I got up, had breakfast, went to work. And when they found out that we were serious about getting married, why, Ansel and his wife said, we'd love to have you married in our home. And so we graciously accepted.
My name is John Gasser. I'm president of Adolph Gasser Incorporated here in San Francisco. When my father went off to go to war in the Second World War, he left in '44, so I was about 3 years old. And he fixed the '37 Chevy that my mother drove, and he rebuilt the engine and everything else. Where was his son? Oh, I was under the car getting greasy and everything else and being taught, this is the bearings, this is how this works, I'm 3 years old. It was a lot of fun. He would teach you things, and that's really the thing I really enjoyed. I was lucky to have him as a father. First off, I gotta say my father got into an industry that I think was fantastic. The things you had to learn in this industry is phenomenal. I mean, you had to know chemistry, you had to know optics, you had to know lighting, you had to know how to deal with people. He'd listen to a person. They would describe their problem and he would be listening, and then he'd think about it and he'd come up with an answer. And that was a real positive. And he didn't hold himself above people. He'd talk to anybody, listen to anybody. A strange person was Bob Hume. And my father and Bob Hume, they got talking, and Bob was a retired engineer, electrical engineer, and the next thing I know is father and he are negotiating to get hired. And Bob Hume was probably the most brilliant man I've ever met on engineering of electronics. And he was a very different sort of personality. And he and my father got along well. And, you know, my father would go to him and say, Bob, can you build such and such? And Bob would say, let me think about it. He'd come back a half an hour later with drawings saying, okay, if we did it this way, the father would say, okay, let's get it done. He had, his history was he put the mic cable systems for the finding the submarines that were coming in the 50s from Russia and everywhere else. And he built the mic system that would find the propeller noise. It was top secret, everything else. The only thing I knew is that he had gone on all 7 seas, and he had made a remark once, put me on the water, I can tell you where I am, because each sea was different. And then about in the 90s, the government gave the sounding system to the people who listened for the whales. So that thing ran from 1950 into the 90s, and Bob Hume made things that lasted. My father associated himself with a variety of people. Mike Fennell ends up running the rental department and opens up Riptide, is his business. John, you taught classes upstairs, teaching people how to light and everything else. I mean, it was, everybody had their talents, and my father would get people to say, well, you got this talent, use it. He'd listen to you guys, and he said, all right, well, let's get it done. Let's try it. And then it would be a big success. You guys would be successful. Father would be successful. The company got successful. I mean, David Keene, to me, is probably one of the better technicians on working on cameras, on the motion picture cameras. And now David Keene is running the theater up in Niles on the history of what happened up there in the starting of the motion picture industry. And then he did that analysis on the film about the earthquake in San Francisco that he made 60 Minutes on, I think, showing that the film was done before the quake.
So there was this film that was shot in San Francisco. People had seen it for generations, called A Trip Down Market Street, that was shot on Market Street before the earthquake on a cable car that goes from 8th Street down to the ferry building. Over the years, people had forgotten who made the film and just exactly when it was made. And they estimated that the film was shot in September of 1905, based upon the buildings that you can see on the Market Street at that time. But what they couldn't tell was who made the film and exactly when it was made. And that intrigued me because I thought in that time period, there weren't that many films being made or that many filmmakers in the world, especially in the United States. With 5 newspapers in San Francisco, there must have been some kind of record about who made that film and when it was made. So I went to the San Francisco Library and looked on microfilm newspapers for August to October 1905, and I couldn't find a thing. Being a film researcher, I realized that there was a publication where all of the film companies actually advertised. And that was a magazine called the New York Clipper. So I went through that and looked through the issues of it. And in the April 21st issue,
I found a advertisement by the Miles Brothers, a San Francisco-based movie company, that said that they were releasing 2 new films, one called A Trip Down Mount Tamalpais and another film called A Trip Through Market Street, which later became recognized as A Trip Down Market Street. The following issue of New York Clipper for April 28th actually outlines what happened after the earthquake of April 18, 1906. And that was that they filmed this trip down Market Street 4 days before the earthquake. Because they had a New York office, after they developed the film in their studio on Market Street, they put it on an eastbound train for their New York office to get it distributed the day before the earthquake, and that's why the film survived. As a result of that research, A Trip Down Market Street got put on the Library of Congress's National Film Registry of 25 films that they recognized that year. So that was the most interesting part to me, that it got on the National Registry. We've got over 10,000 films in our collection, prints, film prints. So we've been collecting not just films, but posters, photographs, everything you can think of. These are the original seats that survived. They went through all kinds of transitions, and it's just probably sheer luck that these theaters survived. Supposedly they took them all out and put them in the street for anybody to take in the 20s. We've got some black body uprights, tabletops from around 1928 that we used to cut the silent film that we made. There's some outtakes. We've been in here since 2004. We started showing silent films in January of 2005 after I got the projection booth fixed up again so that we could use it. This is the projection, the projector that was in the booth at Gasser's in the screening room.
Oh, wow, in the day, yes. In the back room on the 3rd floor.
On the 3rd floor, yeah, the screening room. And this is the custom designed sound system that Robert Hume made in 1976.
It has Hume all over it with the little tabs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I installed this in 2004, and it was the first time this theater had been wired for sound. So we can do sound movies as well as silent. Yeah, most of our 10,000 plus films are 16 millimeter. We've got about 150 35 millimeter films. This is our theater and the studio down the street and the house that's still next door.
Oh my God, Charlie Chaplin. Wow.
1915 here in Niles.
Right here.
Next to our theater.
That's it? That's your theater?
Yeah, that's the theater.
That's wonderful.
That's the best shot we have of what the original front to our theater looked like. And we hope to raise money to restore that at some near future date.
That is fantastic. He's just a young filmmaker there. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing.
He was 26.
26 years old.
When the S&A Film Company was in town, they contracted Chaplin to work for them in 1915, and he made 5 films while he was here in Niles.
Wow.
Including The Tramp. That was his last one here. Shot in Niles Canyon and at the studio. He made A Night Out, The Champion, Jitney Elopement, In the Park, and The Tramp. Fairly large run of Simpty magazines and American Cinematographer magazine.
I was going to say, if you ever need any of this, yeah, I have years and years.
We've got them from 1921 to the present day.
Okay. That's my collection. Look bad. There's the box from 20 years ago that those guys were going.
Rental Department Archives. So these were all essentially test shots, and they would just shoot pictures of each other because that's what was handy.
But all of these that we're going through currently were on the wall. And I remember the day that we left, it's like, We got to take those down. They're the history. A true historian who won't let one go by without my name on the back. Try that one. The janitor.
Oh, yeah, the janitor.
Man who filtered gassers. You have to know the film. That's a good caption.
Yeah. Bill's first paycheck.
He's crying.
It's from St. Mary's Field.
Who's that?
That's me.
Back then?
With a beard and long hair. In the silent film history that I'm part of, I lament so often that I can't go and ask somebody who would have known questions about aspects of film history that nobody knows anymore and nobody will uncover because it's simply gone. And to think that you've got all this interview material that would otherwise be gone now is great to know. Gasser's employees were the YouTube people of the day because we knew what we were talking about and because we used the stuff that we sold. That's why we were formed. We were afraid things were being lost.
I did not expect to be working at Adolph Gasser's when I first started in 1998, but certainly that changed my life entirely. That was a trajectory that I feel truly was meant to be. So I was hired and I started to work with two other individuals in the motion picture department who were good guys. So we were working there, and halfway through the training process, they both quit. And they left me to run everything, and this was difficult, especially so since customers are not forgiving very much if you don't have the right answers, what they're looking for. So I did that. I had to learn quickly. It was sink or swim, and I decided to tough it out. I took camera manuals home with me every day on the bus, to and from Marin, read them, I absorbed that information, and I became very good at it. So I ended up selling a lot of gear. It worked out. And then later, those two individuals came back, were rehired, and I think quite honestly, they were quite surprised to see me there. Honestly, the pay was horrible. I started there at a very low rate, as everyone did, and you just learned what you could learn. I think the key thing about Gasser's is that with the pay, people stayed because they had other opportunities, because they found creative outlets for themselves, they could work on films, they found a way to make it advantageous for them. The idea for the Adolph Gasser documentary actually was an easy one, because I watched Adolph one day take a towel, put it down on the counter. He had a still camera that, with two tools, he took apart and had hundreds of pieces around him, springs, screws. He found the problem, tap, 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 and then he put it all back together fairly fast. And the thing worked perfectly, click, click, click. It was like watching a masterwork. And I realized he had these unique skill sets, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a movie on him? The worst day imaginable, which was the day I asked Adolph to cross the street to go to the parking lot and film him, as he had done 10,000 times. But on this particular day, it was different. So I'm across filming, and he does his walk like he always does, and he gets halfway. And he's looking, he's being very careful, and a vehicle passes him, and all of a sudden, and I'm stunned. I yell at the driver, put the camera down, race over to help him, and fortunately it didn't completely run over him, it just knocked him over, and he's bruised and cut, and fortunately is able to get up and walk on his own abilities. And I said, hey, let's get you to the hospital, let's try to, get you some medical help, and he refuses. And he goes back in the store. And he goes and cleans up, and he's out in a few minutes, and he's headed to his car to go home go to bed early, and sure enough, he comes back the next day. And I gotta tell you, he's one tough guy. So 20 years ago, right about now, is when I started the documentary, filming Adolph for several years. And there's a reason it's taken so long. I can't say exactly what that is, but I know that everything has its own time. And right now is the time for the story to be told. And hopefully a lot of people will appreciate who the person was, what that era was, and find some connection. I asked Adolph what was his most favorite part about his life. And he said to me, everything. Being Adolph Gasser. And I thought that was perfect.
My name's Cullen, Quave, and I worked here approximately, I think, 7 years as well. I believe 1987 through 1995. I worked in the motion picture department. When I got hired here, when Adolph finally told me that he would hire me, and he asked me when I could start, I said, well, I'm currently working at this other camera store, which I really couldn't stand. And I really wanted to leave right away. I said, well, I could quit. I'll be here tomorrow. And he said, oh, absolutely not, Cullen. You have to give them 2 weeks notice. I thought, well, that's kind of honorable too. You know, believe me, I worked for other people too. I said, fine, start tomorrow. You know, screw them. And I really hadn't had much interaction with them, to be honest, up until this point. My hair was constantly changing because it was the 80s. It was constantly changing color. And he said, Cullen, would you please just pick one color? Just one color. That's all I'm asking. And I thought, you know, that's not asking too much. So I stripped my hair. I got rid of the orange. He hated the orange. And it was fine. And, you know, that was one of the little steps between us. Overall, I'd say it was an excellent experience. I learned a lot more working here than I ever did in college. It really just depended upon how much you really wanted to learn, because you had everything at your fingertips here. Anything you could possibly want to study, whether it was medium format, large format, video, film, sound, lighting, whatever it was, you could really excel. And the money was really terrible, but, you know, in a lot of ways I felt very, very good because I made such great friends. I taught myself a whole lot of stuff that I never would have learned in school.
Yeah, I produced a lot of work, and I've shot tons of stuff on the roof, in here, in the screening room, on the floor.
It was almost like a little creative school. It really was. Between your contacts and your coworkers. Another thing I learned here was just to really trust people. I couldn't believe how lax the security was here, and the inventory infrastructure, etc., and how honest people really were. I mean, I thought there would be way more thievery going on just because, way more than that was even apparent to me. But I don't know, I just thought that was really great. It was a good lesson for me to learn, not to be so distrustful that everyone's stealing.
I mean, it pisses me off when people, like, say bad things about this place. You know, because the internet has made people so cheap. You know, that they just want everything, like, for nothing, but they don't respect that they can come in here and, you know, touch everything and look at it for hours and ask a million questions. I mean, I'm still defended on the phone every day, probably, or at least a couple times a week.
She is. She's a little bulldog for this place. You are. I remember Marianne one day when I was really having a really horrible, horrible day. And it was between personnel and clients and, you know, budget restraints, etc. I went over to Marianne. I just said, I don't know how long I can do this. I really can't take it anymore. And she goes, and I just said, I really think there's something wrong with me. Why am I working here? She goes, well, there's something wrong with every single person who works here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. I used to have dreams, actually, that I'd come back to work. I used to, about once a year, once every other year or something. That's one of the reasons I quit here the first time, because I went on this great vacation, and I was snorkeling. And the further I went underwater, the more I thought about these stupid things like LOL part numbers. You know, that I had to keep in inventory and order, and I had all the numbers in my head, and I knew exactly what every number, you know, correlated to what part it was. And I came up, and it ruined my snorkeling. It totally ruined my snorkeling trip that day, and I came back and quit. I just figured it was too much. I had spent way too much time here. I totally knew that he knew that I was going with Mona, and no matter what I said or how to smooth it over or to please Adolph, he was so cool. He never made me feel terrible. He never tried to talk me out of it. Instead, he started talking about grandfather clocks. And he went on and on. It just blew my mind that he could do this. And it was like over an hour I sat in that office. thinking, when is this going to end? What does this have to do with anything? I'm leaving the company. I'm giving my notice. He doesn't seem to be the least bit upset about it. But it took me a while to just kind of digest that and think, it's fine. Life goes on.
The way photographers worked is they get a job and they'd have to go buy the film, drive there, photograph, process, print, all on their dime. And they never had money, and Adolph would give them credit. And at the end of the month when they got paid, they'd come in and give them the whole check because, they owe him so much money. And he kept these people working.
One of the things that I started, even in our Gary store, was that I realized many young photographers would come in and ask me to give them credit, and I would ask them to bring their portfolios in and let me look at their work. And on the strength of that, I would make the decision as to whether they were competent enough, if I gave them credit, that their ability to sell their product was such that I would get paid. So a number of photographers have told us, you gave me my start. Nobody would give me credit, and you gave me credit and helped me get started.
You have no idea all the people that I met. You're Adolph Gasser's daughter, really? Oh, I went to, I went to his shop, Gasser's, and I got this and I got that, and I had someone tell me that I never would have gotten into film if it hadn't been for their rental store.
There were a lot of people in the rental department in the old days just goofing off because there were no rentals to be had. Nobody was coming there. And the equipment often couldn't be trusted because the guys in the department didn't really care that much. So we turned that around in 1982, enough so that just a couple of years later, we had this whole new building to work out of on Bryant Street.
For a long time, it went really well. We were the house. At one point, we hit $1 million in a month. We were a big business. We had 120 employees at one point. So business was booming. Adolph had a policy that any gear left in rentals on Friday night was free. Any employee could take out something and use it all weekend and bring it back. And so a lot of people went to work in movies and rentals so they could access the microphones, the mixers, the gears, the cameras, and they'd take advantage of it. And they would just get all their friends together to make a movie, and everyone would help on their movie. And then they would make their movie, and everyone would help on their movie. And so if you went into rentals on a Saturday or a Friday night, there'd be nothing there. I mean, they would take everything. Adolph needed his people to be knowledgeable in what they were doing. So if they went out and made a movie, that adds to their knowledge. The equipment that stays behind is not getting rented anyway. So it's not costing him anything. And his employees are very happy. And happy employees is where you start. Because if your employees are going to sabotage you or not give effort, your business is not going to work.
I cannot count the number of people who went into the industry from the rental department there. Just dozens and dozens of people. There were so many camera assistants that got their start in Gasser's in the rental department, learning the craft and then getting hired by some producer to work on, as an assistant or even as a DP without hardly any knowledge really to speak of outside of the work that they'd done at Gasser's.
That was like a major commitment in my life to really make that place grow. In fact, it was behind that counter talking with customers that the Film Arts Foundation started. It was actually, the idea was right there in the rental department.
It was great. It was like a community of filmmakers. The whole reason FAF was formed was because nobody could afford to buy a flatbed editing machine. And so these filmmakers pooled together to buy a machine so that they could all use it without renting one somewhere. And that formed the organization for them buying other editing equipment and cameras, and became a nonprofit that supported foundations giving money to independent filmmakers. Because of Film Arts Foundation, there were a huge number of independent filmmakers in the Bay Area. The Harvey Milk film, and you mentioned the Parrots of Telegraph Hill. That was all local stuff. And they would have a monthly screening at Adolph Gasser's in the screening room of works in progress so that people could see what the community was doing.
And so what would happen is that whoever was on the list to bring their film in would show the film, and then the other filmmakers would make comments, sometimes really nasty, sometimes really good, but always comments, and always something that I think really improved the quality of the films that were being made. I remember one year there were a lot of grants awarded by PBS for making documentaries throughout the United States. And San Francisco got more grants than New York, and that was considered quite an accomplishment at the time.
One of the coolest things about my grandfather is he wasn't competitive. He wasn't competitive in that way that someone else couldn't occupy the same space. So he had a camera store, you had a camera store, guess what? If you wanted to be, you could be his best friend because you were most like him. You had the same situations, the same problems, you're dealing with the same people, you're getting the same equipment. So he never saw anybody as a real adversary.
The guy that got me into the whole frame of mind of renting camera equipment, this gentleman from Los Angeles, Otto Nimmons, he decided to come up with his wife and visit me and just to have me take him around, show him San Francisco. He was interested in seeing the different rental facilities. I took him to all the different rental houses, and we ended up at 750 Bryant. And while we were there, Adolph walked in, just happened to walk in, and I introduced the two of them, and they talked for a while about this and that, and then we left, and that night at dinner, Otto told me that of all the places that he went, I said, well, what did you think is my biggest competition? You know, what do I have to do? How do I have to be? And he says, well, you know, of all the people there, he says, I'm the most impressed with Adolph. Not because of his, you know, what he's doing with the film business or how he's going to be a competition here, but just the fact that this guy has embraced so many different things, the still photography and helping students and having the stores that selling the cameras. And he says, you name it, the guy he's doing everything. You know, it's not like one little thing that he's just doing. He's got the whole thing. He's doing everything. He says, he impressed me the most of all the people that you had me visit today. And I was very surprised to hear him say that. And it was nice to hear him say that. And I kind of thought about Adolph in a different way, because for me, it was sort of like, it was me or him or me or this other company, or we were always fighting over 50 cents over a rental to get a rental or something. But to have somebody I was very impressed with be very impressed with him, it's kind of a good day for me.
How would you describe your grandfather?
An exceptional human being. What I want to tell about him is that he managed to find a way to put people first. He worked and supported his mother starting at 12 years old. He sent his eldest brother to college, and his eldest brother was supposed to come back and work so he could go to college, and that didn't happen. Instead, his eldest brother was like, well, I'm actually getting married, so sorry, Adolph. And there was some hurt, but he never stopped helping people. He had a very humble story. He didn't have a college education. He built his life with the people around him, and he just kept doing that.
What was your mother and Adolph's relationship like?
About as rocky as mine, just longer. They were completely different people. In some ways, my mother is ungovernable. She is a very strong person, and she has a very strong will, and so does my grandfather. So the similarities are the strong will, and then the differences are what divide them. And then my grandfather was very good with finances, and my mother, having kids and, you know, being a single mom, had other challenges and things. So definitely they had their misunderstandings and their difficulties, but I think in a way they are so much alike. And oftentimes that's what caused the division. It's weird because he had a big personality, but he wasn't the type of person to do things to draw attention to himself. Nothing was flashy. And he was just that way. He, you know, pocket protector, pen, button-up shirt, shaved every day. Wasn't looking to be a big personality, he just was. He really was an exceptional boss. He believed in people. He put them first. If you would ask me what was the most important thing at Adolph Gasser's Inc., it was the employees.
What did the employees think of him?
I mean, you're standing here interviewing me, so I think that's a testament to what employees think of him. I'm sure you could find an employee that has a gripe or didn't like him or didn't get along with him. That's with anybody. But by and large, you have to look at the impact. You have to look at the people who still talk about him, still think about him. And there's a good number. And I would say they loved him, clearly. He honored who you were, what you did. He knew everyone. He knew their story. Like a family, he treated people like they were his own family. Yeah, I don't think he ever told me he loved me, but everything he did told me he loved me. So it's not one of those things where I'm gonna like, oh, he never told me. It was like, clearly I knew he did. He didn't have that kind of language in his generation. We had problems. I was a great source of frustration to him, but we were close. And I was there when he passed. And I was at his house 2 weeks before he passed, fixing stuff. And our relationship reconciled, but it started out close. It always was close. It just had pain, yeah. When I was younger, he really wanted me to work on cars with him and work on projects and cameras and things like that. He wanted me to learn when I was younger, and I just didn't want to. Can't go back and change that. But there's something in the blood, I guess. I don't know what it is. I'm here, I have a shop full of machines, very similar to one my Uncle John had, very similar to one, you know, we had in Clement, and some of these machines are even from Clement and from John's shop. They're valuable to me because they have that legacy. And so in some ways, if I'm here, if I'm being creative, if I'm fixing and coming up with solutions and helping people in my community fix equipment or whatever it is, his legacy lives on.
He told me that he made the resolution after what had happened to his own parents' marriage, that no matter how hard things got, he would never walk out on the marriage while his children were growing up. They finally were divorced in 1960. So it would lasted a long time, you know, over 20 years. Then 2 years later, he met his second wife, which is kind of a delightful story. She was a widow, but she had a Nikon camera that her husband had purchased, and she knew nothing about it. And she went to the store and said, you know, can you explain this to me? And Adolph said, well, yeah, sure, I'm willing to give you some help. And I guess something sparked, and then next thing you know, a couple of weeks later, she showed up in the store. I'd like to get a sliber jerker. Can you help me with this? And and it sort of built from there. And they were ultimately married, and they were married for 40 years.
We've had some wonderful trips. We've been to Europe on our honeymoon, 6 weeks of that. We've been to Africa, had a wonderful trip there. I've been to China several times. We've been to South America. We can't do those things anymore. My wife has Alzheimer's. This started about 1996. Up till about a year ago, I was able to take care of her pretty well myself. I did the shopping, I did the cooking. The Alzheimer's disease has been sapping her mind.
When I talked to Adolph for the first time, he said that basically his wife had Alzheimer's disease. I mean, she was in care, critical care. He said, I keep working because that's the only way I can stay sane. I come to the office. He had an office in the back of the store. He came to work every day in order to basically keep himself busy.
I have 24-hour day care for her, but I can't do it anymore. I have to get away and do things that keep my mind active, and coming to work is one of them. Each morning I leave for work, and Marion asked to come along, and I said, if I can't take you anymore. I used to bring her to work. It worked out pretty well. Now it's like when she's here, it's like all my time is spent taking care of her. So she's better off being taken care of at home.
Well, I'll never forget when a guy came up to the motion picture area and he said to me, "Teach me all you can about film." And I said, "How much time do I have?" And he goes, 20 minutes. And I thought, that's not a lot of time. I reminded him that I had 2 degrees, a bachelor's and a master's. I had been on a number of films, commercials, projects, and 20 minutes just wasn't going to cut it. And he left. But that got me thinking, maybe there's another venue for people who want to learn workshops or want to learn film, and they don't want to go to a traditional educational institution. It doesn't have to be that. And so I put together a proposal, took it to my supervisor. She said, "Okay, we're going to run with it, but I got to warn you, if it isn't successful, it's on you." But I took that as a challenge. I loved it. And I started doing beginning cinematography and taught that, 1998. And it went well. It went really well. So eventually I taught intermediate and advanced cinematography. This was all over a period of maybe 8-9 years that this went on. And it was great. It afforded me an ability to make a decent living, to do what I love doing, and it really changed my life. Probably one of the biggest highlights was the first day, first class, and the door opens up. I'm in the middle of teaching. Adolph Gasser walks in. He waves to everybody. Everybody's surprised. I'm surprised. He says, "Thank you for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Have a great time." Turns around, goes out, and he never did this again. But that first day, that first time, that was his way of saying he cared and showing his appreciation. I loved it. Another highlight was about halfway through the 8-9 years that I did this, I was in a class. I just trained everybody how to run the camera, set the lights. We did the scenario, and it felt so good, and they were so happy. I leaned back in my chair, and I just pinched myself because I couldn't believe I was having such a good time teaching this and that they were enjoying it as much as I was, maybe more, who knows. But I was really having a great moment of existence. And that, I really believe, is something everybody should experience. Well, for some people, it was something they were just curious about, which I think is a good thing to explore. For others, it was life-changing. And I was really surprised at some of the things that happened. For instance, there was one young woman who had taken the class twice with me. And then, afterwards she said, "I would love to take you out to dinner. I've got something really important to tell you." And I said, "Okay." And we were having dinner, and she said, "I just want you to know, I think I found my calling, and I want to be a documentary filmmaker." I said, "Wow, that's fantastic." She goes, "So I've quit my job." She used to work at a bank. And she goes, "I'm leaving next week for Montana." To which I said, "Wow, this is incredible." And part of me is thinking, what have I done? And then she said, "Yes, I told my mom about it, and she wasn't very happy." But I realized in the look on her face, the joy that she had, that she knew this is what she wanted to do, and that this class in some way helped her, made me equally happy for her. And I think it's a great thing when you can do something and it influences somebody to find themselves. Those workshops helped me in a big way. It was a wonderful experience with which I was able to transition that into teaching at many other schools. All this time, I thought I was the only one to do these types of filmmaking workshops. And then I found out about Stephen Lighthill.
My name is Stephen Lighthill. I run the cinematography program here at AFI, and I'm a former president of the American Society of Cinematographers. I think I started teaching at Gasser's in the early 70s. We did some of the teaching on Bryant Street at the rental facility he had there. I also did a few sessions at his screening room on 2nd Street. They were strictly built around what I was learning at the time. And, you know, I think there were a lot of beginning cinematographers who wanted to know, you know, how I did that. I mean, the work I had mainly for CBS was really prestigious because I was located in San Francisco, but I was taken all over the country to do these pieces. You know, Mike and I developed a seminar together. I would sit down and talk over with him what I was going to do and how I was going to do it and how the day would lay out, how much gear I needed from him. I think those seminars were really crucial because they really took a lot of preparation. They were a day-long seminar. People paid, I don't know, $70 or something like that. You know, Mike and I would kind of divide up the money between what he was losing by using his facilities. Because, like, we would tie up Bryant Street for the entire day. You couldn't take stuff in or out. You couldn't do anything. The people who attended the Gasser seminars, I think you had directors who wanted to know, like, how a cinematographer works and what to expect. You had cinematographers who were trying to, you know, up their lighting game and learn some new techniques. I think my first divorce was a result of having spent so much time in the garage, in the basement, working on all this stuff. And in all of that, I was always crossing paths with Adolph and chatting with him. It was the beginning of my educational career, and it was a great thing to do. And I was incredibly nervous because it was, I think I teach cinematographers here. Look, one of the biggest things you have to do is stand up in front of the class and talk, because that's the job of a cinematographer. Doing those seminars at Gasser's, I was incredibly nervous because public speaking was not at all what I was naturally inclined to, you know, and so the seminars were really, really great for me to develop the ability to stand up in front of people, have an agenda, explain what I was doing. It was great to have Mike and Adolph to talk to. And I remember there were a lot of times I would go in and they'd go, I don't know, figure it out for yourself. So one of the things I got from Gasser's that I didn't know existed was Mole Richardson made this battery pack that was 2 cases. A human could barely lift one of them. And each case was 5 motorcycle batteries wired together. And when you plugged the 2 cases together, you got 120 volts DC. Lights like this, the 2K light, the Mighty Mole, would run AC or DC. So you could wire these into this incredible battery pack, which was in the trunk. And then you ran the cable forward and you powered this light, right? And I see the trunk is open, so that's where the battery pack is. It was I don't know, madman dreamed that up. It's funny, I just threw away a flyer from Gasser's that I had on the wall here for a long time. Had a picture of me and then described the seminar and everything.
So the business was going away and digital became more popular, so we had less film sales. And then the internet became a big thing. Well, you've heard it all. You know, we've got a poor economy. Not a lot of people use cameras. They use their phones. Discounters. I think one thing that kept our store open way past its prime is that we had a parking lot. Because otherwise it would have only been foot traffic and we would have been gone.
People aren't shooting on film like they used to. It's done on video. Some of our professionals have told me, said, I've stopped shooting on film because I can't make any money at it anymore. I can do it on video, but I can't. The cost of shooting on film and editing and having it processed and all is just going out of sight and price. There's no market for a lot of things that we were doing a few years ago.
And the Los Angeles rental houses were going so low that it was cheaper to rent a camera from Los Angeles and bring it up to the Bay Area than rent a camera in San Francisco. You know, they were like charging one rental day for a week out of Los Angeles. And we couldn't compete with that. I'm surprised that Lee Etterback lasted as long as he did.
Well, it's nice of you to make it like it's a nice thing to be the last guy standing. I don't know whether it's, you know, the last guy that forgot to leave the party, you know. It's hard to say. But we were always fighting this belief that there really wasn't anything in San Francisco, that it was sort of looked upon that they were surprised that we actually had electricity here. I mean, it was just people coming up from here from Los Angeles who were very much afraid to trust that they could put their production together using local equipment and people. And so for years, I think we've all fought to change that attitude that you can get the equipment here. You can get good people here. The days of the, you know, the wonderful 80s and 90s are just gone.
I was actually sitting next to him once when things were very bad for him. The construction cost a lot of money. There was someone who put a labor act against him. And he looked over at me and he said, I'll sell you my store for a nickel. Now he survived. It's his nature.
It really hurt because you didn't have to pay the sales tax if you ordered out of New York. So yeah, there was a lot of times, and I've talked to quite a few. People would come in and, oh, is that the new da-da-da-da-da? Oh, can I see it? And you could tell because they knew what they were looking for. And they want to see it. Oh, can you show me the camera? Can you do this? Can you take pictures? Can you make a print? Do you have a printer? And then, you know, you realize that it was probably a 5% difference or an 8% difference is why they didn't buy from you. So you always tried to make the case of like, hey, you know, build a relationship. You know, I'm Andrew, I'm here. Like, if you have any questions, you know, that was the way I tried to combat it. And then they tell you that was the worst part. Well, I'm going to go buy it from B&H because I don't have to pay sales tax. Thanks. You know I can't change that, right? That's fantastic.
Come again?
Yeah, I get paid on commission.
May of last year, the San Francisco Business Times published a newspaper outlining the entire plans that the city had. And lo and behold, we found our name on the list of buildings that were going to be demolished. First we'd heard of it. So we began to do investigations, and we find that the city has plans for an enormous rebuilding of South of Market. I mean, very, very large changes. The way it read is they said all the good things, none of the bad. And of course the city claims that I guess I could be sued on this, but I don't care. The city said that they have notified everyone. Of all the people that we talked to up and down the street, and we met with a number of them, not a single one of them had been notified about what the city plans were.
I thought it was strange that even in the voter pamphlet, the description of the proposition didn't say anything about the destruction to the buildings. So nobody really knows about that at all, except for what our little pamphlets say.
So people thinking it's just a tax increase, and they're going, okay.
Right.
So what do you think this means for...
We're screwed.
Yep.
This whole area is like small businesses with coffee shops, restaurants, Photographers, artists, poets, writers, sign makers, you name it. They all came here just to start a business here. Now that the city just wants to take it away and just for what? A train? That's wrong. Bringing the trains right where I'm sitting, where the right-hand turn's going to go right through where I'm sitting, that is wrong. It's bad planning, bad design. I think they might have put something in the milk where they were drinking coffee to say, yeah, we're going to run the trains right under here. No, it's wrong.
And according to them, by the time they get this whole thing finished, the face of South of Market will be completely changed. There will be a great deal of housing, condos and things. There's one being built right now on the Tomet and Howard and New Montgomery.
Gasser's establishment, they not only supply the photographers, they supply the cinematographers, the videographers like you, and a lot of people who are into photography and visual arts. A lot of people grew up with Adolph Gasser. They've been here forever. And it's an establishment in this city. And it's a shame to see him go. I'm very sorry.
I think the city wants to get rid of the older buildings that are protected by Prop 13 so that they can get a bigger property tax from the land. So by taking our building, the building on either side of us, the ones behind us and down Natoma Street, they're going to end up with probably somewhere 11,000 square foot lot that they can sell to the developers for a high rise. So you stop to think about the level of the floors, each one bringing in property taxes on a 30 or 40 building. What we're paying is peanuts.
And that played out for years. Then they said, no, we're not taking your building. And then it was, we're taking your building, but it'll be 10 years. And so they were going to start it. And everyone said, no, you're going to tear up downtown. All these businesses are going to lose their space. And these people are going to be unemployed. And the land is going to be unusable for 10 years. And then the neighborhood developed a little organization to fight this. And they all kind of joined together. And now there were meetings and there were planning.
Today we're planning on putting up posters like this in all the stores on 2nd Street. And we're going to also have letters on the counters of the stores so the people who come into these stores can register their feelings on that we want 2nd Street to be tunneled and not just cut and covered and not destroying about 150 businesses on 2nd Street. We feel that the Board of Supervisors and everybody else needs to take a good, hard look at what they're proposing. Current plan is if you want to destroy this whole neighborhood and take out the historic sites and everything else, that is the current plan. We think he'll concede. We think EARA was not done well. We feel there's better options on the table.
We put a lot of money into this building, and had we known, and we don't own this building, had we known what they were going to do, we wouldn't have done it. But now we're here, and you want to stay. You want to be like City Lights or like any other cultural institution that San Francisco has, because that's also a national, it's a resource of the city. It means that we're trying to be involved in the city, in San Francisco, and keeping all of our businesses alive, banding together as a group, and trying to improve the city. We want to have the Transbay Terminal project, but the way that they're going about doing it is much more destructive than constructive.
The only thing I can say how it affects me personally is that I could be out of a job in a few years. Would be nice if I could work at least another 6 years. I'm 60 years old. Wasn't planning on an early retirement. I don't know how great opportunities for other employment are out there for someone 60 years old. I think the unfortunate thing on Proposition K was that it probably could have been split up into 2, 3, 4 different propositions. There were actually some things that were good on there, but the passing over so lightly of the area that is affecting us personally is really tragic. hopefully the wheels of progress will move slowly.
Yes, I'm surprised it's taken this long, and I'm afraid it's going to take another 17 years because the city doesn't have the money to buy the property, and I'm going to be dead, and I'd be 93 at that time. So we've decided, because of that and other issues, that it was time to retire. I've got to go out and have some other activities in life before I pass on from this place. The main reason was the eminent domain was one. The other is I'm turning 76 this year. My father worked until he was 92, but he had backup, which was me. I don't have a son, and I have a daughter, and she's interested in social services and not running a photographic company. So I decided, I think it's time I take a look for a way out. The store is not going to be sold to the city yet because the city doesn't have any money to buy it. They will keep the eminent domain on it. We're going to rent the building out, and that will remain until the eminent domain comes or if they cancel it.
Well, at the time it was built, it was one of the largest and longest spans in the world. You got to see the Golden Gate Bridge. This is a fantastic construction. Well, the bridge was opened in '37, to the best of my remembrance. Several of us had discussed the possibility of getting on the catwalk while they were bending the main cables and going across to Marin County and back. One night, we had a beautiful moon and I asked them, well, this is a good night to do it, and they all backed out. So I ended up alone, and I got on the catwalk at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, to the best of my knowledge, and climbed the catwalk up to the South Tower and then down up to the North Tower and back down as far as I could go with almost jumping distance to Marin County and came back. It was quite an interesting experience in my life. And interesting enough, I was up at the top of the South Tower. I looked down to the south. I could see all the way down to San Jose. The whole bridge was laid out. So I strangely enough, I'm not too good at heights, but it didn't seem to bother me that night.
I think he's done more for San Francisco than a lot of people. He loved that city. He was dedicated to it his whole life.
But you think about all the different things that he's been involved in. He really is an institution to the city. And I mean, if if things were right, someday they'd rename one of the streets after him.
I believe that God gave me the grandfather I needed to keep me alive until I got older. But he was just a wonderful man. I mean, everything was impressive. Everything he did, everything, Adolph Gasser, oh, you know, I don't know, it was, it's kind of like being related to somebody from a legend, you know, to some extent, you know. He was bigger than most people. And not because he tried, just because he was.
Because he was not just liked, he was loved by so many people. And those people accepted me. Even if they didn't know me, they knew of me. I really felt like I was part of the family. When Adolph died, he was cremated, and he wanted to have his ashes spread under the Golden Gate Bridge. So Peter Power had a 40-foot sailboat, and I was the only non-family member there. And we all went out, and we're in the bay, and Dorothy spreads rose petals out, and these black dolphins come up. I didn't even know there were dolphins in the bay, and I've never seen a black one. And these black ones came up in the rose petals. It was very intense.
My grandfather had a very strong political identity, but it never affected how he treated people. It never affected who he welcomed or who he did business with or who he helped. And I think that's an important lesson because we're becoming polarized as a society and we are devaluing one another at a rate which is alarming, just based off of who we think each other are. And that didn't exist in Adolph. I don't think it should exist in the world.